Fresh herbs are great. And to avoid confusion with my British fans, fresh herbs are great. But regardless of the pronunciation, many of them are also great when they're dried. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, a master gardener who discusses everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. And today I'm going to show you how I dry my herbs, or herbs. The first and best thing that I recommend about drying herbs is to grow your own herbs. You can grow exactly the kind of herbs that you use. Sure, you can buy fresh herbs at the market, but they can actually cost quite a bit. It's so much easier to just come out, cut some of your herbs and use them fresh, or preserve them by drying and have them all year round. This is my main herb bed. I'm growing 6 different types of herbs. I use them fresh, definitely, but through the simple process of air drying, I'm able to preserve all 6. And it begins by just harvesting the herbs. I like to dry my herbs in a couple big batches in early fall. And I'll come back and I'll cut quite a bit of the herbs. I want to do this before freezing weather comes, when the herbs are at their peak. It's best to harvest the herbs in the morning, but you also want the leaves to be dry. So if you're going to water the plants, be sure to water them the day before. And if you have a lot of morning dew, wait until the sun comes out and begins to dry off the leaves before you harvest. I've been harvesting herbs for a couple weeks now, and I've already dried a big batch so you can see the whole process. And I'll show you 2 different methods that I use when it comes to air drying these herbs. The harvesting is pretty straightforward. I'm just cutting out these branches. This thyme is pretty tough, and it's going to stand up to the cold and snow with no problem, but the leaves are going to darken, the tips are going to die. Might as well take the whole stem during the harvest. The dill, the sage, same type of thing. The leaves are going to suffer in the cold, as is the tarragon and the mint. So when it comes to harvesting, I'm just cutting it down pretty much to ground level and taking out entire stems. This will make the drying process much easier. I like to do this in big batches, but once you have as much as you're ready to dry, the harvest is ready to take indoors. With the herbs indoors, now let's get to the steps to preserving them through drying. Now is the time to wash your herbs if you're at all concerned about the cleanliness or any insect residue. I keep a pretty clean garden, and I rinsed off all of these herbs yesterday, giving them plenty of time to dry, so I don't feel a need to wash them right now. The first thing to do is to lay them out on newspaper or butcher paper, just something to keep them off of the surface of a table or counter. If you have the space, you can just leave the herbs on the paper. That's what I did with my first big batch of herbs. I harvested a big group of them, and then I came inside and just laid them out on the newspaper. And that's where they stayed for 2 weeks, drying through the whole process. Now, this may not work best for you. I have a very dry region. If you have typical average humidity, and especially high humidity, well then just laying the herbs out on newspaper may not be enough. At the least, you'll need to turn the herbs on a regular basis, because the key to drying is airflow. We need air around all the surfaces of these leaves to dry. I can get away with laying them on newspaper and my dry air will dry the whole plant. You might not be able to get away with this. And that brings us to the second method of drying herbs, and that's to hang the herbs. It's really simple. You just take twine, string, I'm using thread, and we want to tie our herbs. So I'll just wrap one of the stems, another stem, and I'll continue doing this until I have a bundle of herbs. If you come across any of the lower leaves that are already dried or maybe insect damaged, go ahead and pull them off at this point. But just take whatever you're using to tie up the herbs and just continue making this bundle. I'll wrap the thread around individual stems, and as I add more, I'll wrap it again around individual stems, and then I'll go around the whole bundle until I have most of the herbs, or all of the herbs that I harvested, tied up. By tying the thread around each individual stem and around the bundle as a whole, I'm really working to keep all of this together, because what's going to happen as these herbs dry, they're going to shrink. So if you don't do that individual wrap and then the whole bundle wrap, you run the risk that as some of these stems get smaller through drying, they'll just slip right out. And then you're going to come in and find all of your herbs on the floor. We want to hang this so it has airflow all the way around. We also want to hang it so all of these pieces stay together. I'll tie a nice loop at the top, and this is all ready to go. And I'll do the same process with this time. Just have a little slip knot to begin, and then I'll just wrap individually, wrap whole, wrap individually, wrap as a whole, trying to get this tight, all the pieces together. Now it might be tempting to do all of a particular herb in one big bundle, but it's better to do multiple bundles. That way there's more opportunity for air to get all around each of these individual branches. If it was all bundled together, some of these internal leaves might not dry completely. After you have your bundles, you need to dry them. Now you can dry them from hooks on the wall, nails in a board. I like to use just a hanger. Now this hanger has little hooks in it already, so it's just a simple matter of finding the loop, putting it over the hook, and this is what I'm going to do with all my bundles, is hang them from this, and then I'll show you where I'd put it next. I have some space in a closet, so I'm just going to hang these herbs, and this is where they'll dry. Now I shortened some of these bundles so that they're not all hanging together. They're effectively hanging at a couple different levels. And then I'll just leave them in the closet. Wherever you hang your herbs, you should expect to leave them undisturbed for at least 2 weeks. Now, I think a closet is nice because there aren't going to be a lot of bugs getting on the herbs. There aren't going to be any house pets, no blowing dust, no kids. The idea is that they're hanging, they're drying, and after they're dried, then you remove them from that location. After 2 weeks, it's time to start thinking about saving the dried herbs. At the 2-week point, actually check on the herbs. Take a leaf and crumble it between your fingers. If it crumbles and it's completely dry, then it's ready to save. And that's the key. You want the leaves to be completely dry when you're saving these herbs. If it's still soft or still moist at all, then let it keep drying for a longer period of time. Some herbs, like the mint and the tarragon, do have more moisture in their leaves, so they might take longer to dry. And if you live in a pretty humid environment, especially those type of leaves may not dry much at all before mold sets in. So if the leaves are staying pliable and you start seeing any type of mold development, you probably can't get away with the air drying. You'll need to use a dehydrator or an oven on a low setting. But for most of us and for most of the herbs, air drying will be perfect. And after you've done that finger test, now it's time to take the herbs and put them into jars or baggies or paper bags or whatever you're going to use to store the herbs. And I begin with just a clean sheet of paper with all of the herbs laid in front of me. I start with a clean piece of paper folded in half. This makes pouring the herbs into a jar much easier. And then with the dried herbs, like thyme, it's just a simple matter of pulling the dried leaves off of the stems onto the paper. And then periodically, I'll just take the paper and pour it into the jar. And then I'll keep going with the rest of the dried herbs. For the long stems and long branches of this tarragon, I'll separate the branches first, and then I'll do the same thing, just stripping the dried leaves off. And then pouring them in the jar. For an herb like sage, I'll just pluck off the individual leaves and drop them directly into the jar. I find this is a little bit easier than stripping all them off. And it gives me some whole leaves that I can use in making sauces and lots of poultry dishes. I really like to use these glass jars to store my herbs. They hold a lot, and I can see right through it, so I know what the herb is. And they fit on my shelf, so they're always at my fingertips. I will occasionally use some plastic bags, like I have some dill in here, and these leaves will be transferred to other smaller containers, but I don't have those containers yet. I will save some of the little spice bottles from the store. When they're empty, they can be reused. So this is an Italian seasoning, just a basic blend that I bought long ago, but I reuse this little bottle with my own blend. I'll take some of my dried thyme and dried sage and dried oregano, put it into this and reuse it. So I never have to buy herbs again because I grow it, I dry it, and it's all ready to use. And this is something you should definitely consider doing. If you'd like to learn more about other ways to preserve your harvests, I have other videos in my library, including these right here. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.